My daughter-in-law stood in the middle of my own kitchen waving a lottery ticket like a flag of conquest and told me I had until the weekend to pack a bag for a nursing home. I set my teacup down on the counter, the one with the chip on the handle that my late husband used to tease me about keeping, and I looked at her flushed, triumphant face. "Sweetheart," I said, "before you start measuring my room for your treadmill, did you happen to check whose name is signed on the back of that ticket?" She didn't answer. She just blinked, the way a person blinks when the ground they've been standing on turns out to be a frozen pond. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense unless you understand how we got to that morning in February, with the snow piled to the window ledges and the furnace ticking, and the three of us crammed into a house that had been mine and only mine for going on 31 years. I'm 67. My husband passed 4 winters ago, a heart attack on the driveway while he was clearing the snow, shovel still in his hand when the neighbor found him. We'd bought this house in the east end of Peterborough back when you could buy a place on 1 income and a prayer, and we paid the mortgage off 2 years before he died. It's nothing grand, a brick bungalow with a finished basement, a maple in the front that he planted the year our boy was born, and a kitchen I've repainted so many times I've lost count of the colors. But it's mine. The deed is in my name now, the title clean, the land registry up to date. I made sure of that the month after the funeral, sitting in a lawyer's office with my hand shaking, signing where she told me to sign. I want you to remember that. It matters later. My son is my only child. I had him late, when the doctors had more or less told me to stop hoping, and so he came into the world like a gift I hadn't expected to receive. He's a good boy. I know every mother says that, and I know mine isn't perfect, but he is kind underneath, and he was always tender with his father and gentle with me. He's 38 now. He drives for a regional courier company. Long hours, decent pay when the routes are full, nothing when they're not. He worries about money the way some men worry about their health, constantly and quietly, never quite saying it out loud. 5 years ago, he married a woman I'll just call my daughter-in-law, because in all honesty, I don't much like saying her name anymore. And you'll understand why. She's younger than him by a good bit, sharp and pretty and ambitious in a way that has nothing to attach itself to. When they married, I told myself I'd love her because he loved her, and I tried. Lord knows I tried, but there's a coldness in some people that warms up only when they want something, and it took me a while to learn that her warmth toward me ran on a meter. They moved in with me 4 months after the wedding. The story was that they were saving for a down payment, that housing in this country has become a cruelty. The 2 years under my roof would let them sock away enough for a place of their own. And that part was true. Houses here cost what a small farm used to cost. Rent in Toronto or even down the highway in Oshawa would have eaten them alive. So I said yes. Of course I said yes. What kind of mother shuts the door on her own son? 2 years became 5. The down payment fund became, as far as I could ever tell, a series of new phones, a leased SUV, a trip to Cancun, the winter my furnace died, and I paid for the new one out of my own savings. I never said a word about it. That was my mistake, and I'll own it. I told myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping my family, and those are not the same thing at all. I learned that the hard way. For the first couple of years, it wasn't bad. We'd have supper together. My son would do the snow in the morning before his shift, and I'd have the coffee on when he came home. My daughter-in-law kept to herself mostly, which suited me. But somewhere along the way, the house stopped feeling like mine and started feeling like a place I was being tolerated in. She rearranged my cupboards without asking. She put my husband's chair out at the curb one garbage day and told me afterward with a little shrug that it didn't match anything. I cried in the bathroom over that chair with the tap running so they wouldn't hear. Then I came out and said nothing, because saying nothing was the only skill I'd really mastered by then. The little things piled up like the snow does, one quiet flake at a time, until you look out one morning and you can't open the door. She started talking about me as if I weren't in the room. She doesn't really need all this space. She'd probably be happier somewhere she didn't have to do stairs. My grandmother loved her retirement residence. Honestly, the social life is better. She'd say these things at supper to my son, while I sat right there passing the potatoes, and he'd look down at his plate, and I'd see the muscle work in his jaw, and he wouldn't say anything either. And I understood then that the silence in this house wasn't only mine. It was a family illness. We'd all caught it. Now, here's the part I haven't told you yet. The small, ordinary habit that turned out to be the hinge the whole thing swung on. I buy a lottery ticket every Friday. I have for years. It's a foolish thing. I know it's a foolish thing. The odds are absurd, but my husband and I used to do it together. We'd pick the numbers off the calendar, the kids' birthdays, our anniversary, the day we met at a church social in 1979. After he died, I kept buying it. The same numbers, every single Friday, from the same convenience store 2 blocks over, where the fellow behind the counter calls me by my first name and knows I take a small coffee, double, while I'm at it. It was never about winning. It was about keeping a small, Friday-shaped piece of my husband alive. I'd buy the ticket, sign the back of it the way the lottery people always tell you to, tuck it in the side pocket of my purse, and forget about it until the next Friday when I'd buy the new one and toss the old. I sign the back the moment I buy it. Always. My husband drilled that into me. Sign it right away, he used to say, or anybody who finds it owns it. Some lessons stick the way his did because he was right and because saying it kept him close. So, the Friday before everything happened, I bought my ticket as usual. Lotto Max, the big jackpot week, the kind where the whole country gets a little giddy. I signed the back, I tucked it in my purse, and I came home and forgot all about it, because I always forgot all about it. The following Tuesday morning, my daughter-in-law went into my purse. She'll tell you she was looking for a stamp. I'll tell you a woman doesn't go through her mother-in-law's purse for a stamp. Whatever the reason, she found the ticket. And being the sort of person who checks these things on her phone before her coffee, she scanned it. I was upstairs making my bed when I heard the scream. Not a hurt scream, a winning scream, that particular shriek that comes out of a person when the world has just rearranged itself in their favor. I came down the stairs as fast as my knees would let me, certain something terrible had happened. And instead, I found her dancing in my kitchen with her phone in one hand and my ticket in the other, my son standing in the doorway in his work uniform with his mouth open. "We won," she kept saying. "We won, oh my God, we won." She was crying and laughing at the same time. And I'll be honest with you, in that first half a second, before I understood, my own heart leapt, because I thought, isn't that something, after everything, a little good luck for this family at last? Then she turned to me, and her face did a thing I will not forget for as long as I live. The joy on it went hard and bright, like ice forming, and she said, "$70 million. We won $70 million. We." She said we. I came closer and looked at the screen and then at the ticket in her hand, and I recognized it. The little crease where it had written in my purse. The numbers, our numbers. The kid's birthday that was my son's birthday, the anniversary, the church social date in 79. My numbers, my husband's and mine. "That's my ticket," I said. And she laughed. She actually laughed at me. "It was in the house," she said. "I found it. Finders keepers, Mom, isn't that what they say?" And then, because she couldn't help herself, because some people simply cannot stop when they're ahead, she added, "Honestly, this is perfect timing. You can finally get yourself settled somewhere proper, and we can have the place to ourselves. We'll even help you pack." I looked at my son. He looked at the floor. I want to tell you that I made a grand speech right then. I didn't. I'm not made that way. And besides, I've learned that the loud ones lose. I just said very quietly, "We'll talk about it tonight." And I went back upstairs and sat on the edge of my made bed, and I shook for about 20 minutes, partly from anger and partly from a cold, clear fear, because I understood something she didn't yet understand. And I understood it because my husband had drilled it into me at a kitchen table 40 years ago. I'd signed the back of that ticket, in my own hand, with my own name, Patricia McInnes. The Lottery Corporation in this province is very clear about this. The person who signs the back of the ticket is the presumed owner, not the person who finds it in a purse, not the person who scans it on their phone. The person whose signature is on the back and whose name and history they can verify, right down to the debit card I'd used to buy it. The same card I've used at that same store every Friday for years. The camera over the counter, the clerk who knows me by name. She had the ticket in her hand, but she didn't have the only thing that mattered. That night, I'm sorry to say, was ugly. She had spent the afternoon, I later learned, telling her sister and 3 friends and somebody at her gym, and she'd already picked out a house she wanted to look at down in the beaches in Toronto, and she was furious that I wasn't simply handing it over. My son tried, in his weak and well-meaning way, to make peace. "Mom, maybe we could all share it," he said. And for a moment I loved him so much it hurt. And then she cut in. "Share it? She's 67. What's she going to do with $70 million? Buy more teacups?" And my son went quiet again, and I watched the last little flame of him go down. That was the moment I stopped being afraid and started being careful. I didn't fight her that night. I let her think she was winning. I said maybe she was right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe we should all sleep on it. I went to bed early, and then I lay awake in the dark, in the room I'd shared with my husband for so many years, and I made a plan, the way he would have made a plan, calm and step by step. The next morning, while she was at her spin class and my son was on a route to Lindsay, I drove to the lawyer. Now, I have a friend. I'll call her my old friend, because that's what she is, my oldest. We've known each other since our boys were in Cubs together, more than 30 years. She went back to school in her 40s and became a lawyer. Real estate and wills mostly, and she's the one who handled my husband's estate and put the house clean in my name. There is no one on this earth I trust more. I called her from the car in the parking lot of the spin studio, my hands cold on the wheel, and I told her everything. And there was a long pause, and then she said, "Get over here right now. Don't talk to anyone. Don't sign anything. And whatever you do, don't let that ticket out of your sight." The ticket was in my purse. It had been in my purse the whole time. My daughter-in-law had scanned it, screamed, danced around with it, and then in all the chaos she'd set it down on the counter. And that night, while they were arguing about my retirement home, I had quietly picked it up and put it back where it lived. She never noticed. She thought possession was 9/10 of the law, and she didn't even possess it. She possessed a photo of it on her phone and a story she'd told everyone she knew. In my friend's office, with the radiator clanking and a cup of bad coffee going cold in front of me, she laid it out plainly. The signed ticket was mine. The purchase record was mine. The pattern of years was mine. The Lottery Corporation has a whole process for disputed tickets, and the process favors, above almost everything, the signature on the back and the verifiable history of purchase. My daughter-in-law had nothing but the fact that she'd been the first to scan it on an app, and that, my friend told me, is worth precisely nothing. She found your wallet on the sidewalk and spent the money in her head, is how she put it. That doesn't make it her wallet. We did everything by the book. My friend came with me that very afternoon to begin the claim properly, the way the corporation tells you to. The two of us sitting across from a very polite young man who took down my information, examined the signed ticket, made copies of my identification, and confirmed what I already knew. There would be a verification period. There always is for a prize that size. But the signature, the man said, looking at me kindly over his glasses, the signature is the thing. I had signed it the day I bought it. I always had. My husband, 4 winters in the ground, had reached out of the past and protected me with a habit he'd nagged me into in 1981. And here's a thing I learned that day that I hadn't known, a thing that made me think hard about the people who'd been so eager to push me out the door. In this country, lottery winnings aren't taxed, not a cent. 70 million is 70 million. There's no government taking half. My daughter-in-law had been counting that money down to the dollar, planning a house in the beaches and trips and Lord knows what. And the whole time, the full sum could only ever land in the lap of the one person whose name was on the back. Mine. I drove home that afternoon, and I made supper like nothing had happened. Shepherd's pie, my son's favorite since he was a boy. I set the table for 3. I'd like to tell you I confronted them then, but I didn't, and I want to be honest about why, because I know how it looks from the outside. People will say, it's your house, your ticket. Why didn't you just throw them out the first night and be done with it? And the answer is, the answer of every mother who has ever loved a difficult child, because of him. Because every time I looked at my son, I saw the boy who used to fall asleep against my shoulder in church, and I couldn't bring myself to blow the whole house down while he was still inside it. I needed to know, first, whether there was anything left of him to save. I needed to give him the chance to choose. So I waited. Not because I was weak, though I'd worried for years that I was weak. I waited because I was deciding what kind of woman I wanted to be when this was over, and the answer mattered to me more than the 70 million did. The chance came about a week later, while the verification was still running its course and my daughter-in-law was growing more impatient by the day, leaving the lottery corporation's customer line on speaker, getting nowhere, because of course she had nothing to verify with. It was a Thursday. She'd had a glass or 2 of wine, and she stood in my kitchen again, in front of my son, and she delivered what I've come to think of, privately, as a speech, about how she'd carried this family for 5 years, about how I was a freeloader in my own home. Can you imagine a freeloader in the house I paid off before she'd finished high school? About how the kindest thing, the dignified thing, would be for me to move into a residence where I'd be looked after and stop being a burden on the young people. And she said, and I will never forget it, frankly, you should be grateful we're letting you stay this long. I looked at my son, and I said gently, is that what you think too? And there was a silence, the longest silence of my life, and I watched my boy's face, and I saw him standing at the very edge of himself, choosing, and he said so quietly I almost missed it, no, Mom, it's not. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was the first true thing anyone had said in that kitchen in 5 years, and it was him who said it. So then I told them. I told them about the signature. I told them about the lawyer, my oldest friend, who had a copy of everything in a file with my name on it. I told them about the purchase record and the camera and the clerk and the years of Fridays. I told them that the ticket they'd been planning a beaches house around had only ever belonged to one person, and that she was 67 and apparently due for a nursing home. I told them finally the thing my husband used to say, that you sign it right away or anybody who finds it owns it, and that I had signed it right away, because the man who taught me to was a better man than anyone in this family had been giving him credit for lately. My daughter-in-law went white, then red, then white again. She grabbed her phone and dialed my friend's office, as if a lawyer who'd known me for 30 years would take her side. She threatened to sue. My friend, when she rang back later, was almost gleeful about it. Let her find a lawyer who'll take that case, she said. I'll bring popcorn. And then I did the hardest thing in the whole story. Harder than waiting, harder than the kitchen, harder than the lawyer. I told them to leave, both of them, my house, in my name, free and clear, and I told my own son he had to go. I gave them 30 days, which is more than the law required and more than she deserved, and I said it without raising my voice, because I'd finally learned that the quiet ones win. I said, "This is my home. It has always been my home. You're welcome in it as my family, but not as my landlords, and not over my husband's grave, and not while you're shopping for the place you'll bury me alive in. So you'll find somewhere of your own. You've had 5 years to save for it. I hope you used the time better than I'm afraid you did." She screamed. He didn't. He just nodded, and there were tears on his face, and I think a part of him had been waiting 5 years for someone to make the decision he couldn't make himself. They moved out, in the end, separately. That's the part I didn't see coming. Within 2 months of leaving my house, they'd separated, and within the year, the marriage was finished. I won't pretend I grieved it. A marriage that turns a kind man into a silent one, that throws an old chair to the curb and an old woman after it, is not a marriage I had any reason to mourn. She landed on her feet, the way her sort does. Last I heard, she'd moved to Calgary and was telling a whole new set of people a whole new story in which she was the wronged one. They're all the same, those stories, when you've heard enough of them. The money came through that spring, once the verification was done. $70 million, not a cent to the government, the largest number I have ever seen with my name beside it. My friend, my lawyer, sat with me and we set it up sensibly, the way my husband would have wanted, slow and careful, nothing flashy. I'm still in the bungalow. I'll die in the bungalow, the right way, in my own time, in the room I shared with the man who taught me to sign the back of the ticket. I bought a new furnace that doesn't tick. I planted a second maple beside the first. I take my coffee at the same convenience store every Friday, and the fellow behind the counter still calls me by my first name, and I tip him now in a way that makes him laugh and protest. And I buy the same ticket with the same numbers, because it was never about the winning. It was about my husband, and it still is. And here's the part the gossips never expect. The part that I think he would have been proudest of. I set aside a great deal of it for my son. Not all at once. I'm not a fool, and neither was his father. My friend helped me put it in a trust, the kind a person can't burn through in a weekend, that pays out steadily over the years and looks after him when he's old, whether or not he ever has anyone else to look after him. He didn't ask for it. He's never once asked. He comes by on Sundays now on his own, and we have supper, just the two of us, shepherd's pie and the old teasing. And he does the snow in the morning, the way he used to. He apologized properly once, with his head down, and I told him the truth, which is that the silence in that kitchen was never only his fault, that I'd taught him to keep the peace by keeping it myself, and that we'd both have to learn to do better, and we have. People ask me, when the story gets around, as these things do, whether I was tempted to leave him nothing, whether the way he stood there and studied his shoes while his wife planned my exile should have cost him everything. And I tell them the truth. Money doesn't make a person. It only turns the volume up on what was already playing. In her, it turned up the cold. In my son, in the end, it turned up the boy who fell asleep against my shoulder in church, the one who finally, at the very edge of himself, said the one true word that saved us both. I kept the house. I kept the maple. I kept my dignity, which for a while there I'd been very much afraid I'd thrown out at the curb along with the chair. And I kept my son, which was the only one of the 70 million pieces I'd ever truly been afraid of losing. She kept the photo on her phone. I imagine she still has it. A picture of a ticket she danced around a kitchen with, in a house that was never hers, holding numbers that were never hers, planning a life she was never going to get to keep. I hope, now and then, she looks at it. And I hope she remembers the question I asked her, the one she couldn't answer, the morning she told an old woman to pack her bags. "Did you check whose name is on the back of the ticket?" It was mine. It was always going to be mine. And I signed it, the way I was taught, the day I bought it, because the man who loved me told me to, and because some lessons, the ones that come from love, are the ones that hold you up when everything else gives way. None of it would have turned out the way it did if I'd kept letting fear make my choices for me. For 5 years, I mistook silence for peace, and that mistake had a price. Every time I swallowed my words, every time I let an old chair go out to the curb without a fight, I taught the people around me that I could be moved aside. People learn what you allow. My daughter-in-law didn't dance around my kitchen with my ticket out of nowhere. She did it because I'd spent years showing her there'd be no consequence. That's the plain arithmetic of it, and I had to face my own column in the ledger before I could be honest about hers. What saved me wasn't luck, and it certainly wasn't the 70 million. It was a small, stubborn habit of doing the right thing the right way, every time, even when no one was watching. My husband taught me to sign the back of the ticket the day I bought it, and I did for 40 years, out of nothing grander than ordinary decency and keeping my word to him. That quiet honesty is what held the whole thing up when the storm came. You can't fake a signature you actually wrote. You can't fake a life you actually lived. But being decent wasn't enough on its own. I had to think clearly when everything in me wanted to scream. I let her believe she was winning while I drove to Joan's office and learned exactly where I stood. I waited, not because I was weak, but because I was choosing my moment and choosing the kind of woman I'd be when it was over, knowing the law, knowing the facts, keeping my head when my heart was pounding. That was its own kind of strength, the kind that doesn't shout. And none of it would have mattered if I hadn't found the nerve at 67 to finally do the hardest thing and tell my own son he had to go. That took everything I had. Real grit isn't never being afraid. It's being afraid and signing the affidavit anyway, packing the boxes anyway, saying the true words in the kitchen anyway. If I could hand the people watching this one thing, it would be those 3 together. Be honest in the small things because they're the foundation everything else stands on. Think before you swing because a clear head beats a loud one every time. And when the moment finally comes to stand up, even if your knees are shaking and the person across the table is your own child. I kept the house. I kept the maple my husband planted. And the morning Bradley finally said the one true word that saved us both, I understood that everything good in my life had come from those 3 quiet virtues, never from the money and never from luck.